Unsold is the third book of the Unwind Dystology. The word Dystology we made up because trilogy didn't work anymore since there's going to be 4 books. It's a dystopian series, and so we came up with Dystology, and we looked it up, and no one had used it yet, so now we have our own word. Unwind is a story about a society in which abortion is illegal, but teenagers can be terminated, sort of like retroactive abortion. And the idea is, though, that every single kid who's unwound, who's put through this process, has to be, 100% of them has to be used in transplant. So it kind of blurs the line between life and death. So if 100% of you is alive, but transplanted, are you alive or are you dead? And the kids have to come to terms with that whole idea of death suddenly becoming a gray area where people can say they're still alive if they're not, and then rationalize it and justify to themselves that it's okay to unwind them. And they have to come to terms with the idea of what does it mean for them if society has told them that they are no longer worth the sum of their parts. In Book 2, Unholy, we meet a character by the name of Cam. And Cam is made up entirely out of the unwound parts of other kids. He is kind of like a 21st century Frankenstein, not made from dead flesh, but made from the living. And he has to come to terms with that. You know, is he an entity? Is he alive? Does he have consciousness if he is just parts made up of other kids when not even his own memories are his own? Now, while I was working on Unholy, I got to about page 350 and realized I haven't even gotten halfway through the story. At that point, it was just going to be a sequel. And so I asked the publisher if I could divide it into 2 books. And they said, okay. And so I restructured it and worked it out so that Unholy stood on its own and got to work on Unsold. And Unsold came in at 620 pages. And the end really felt like it was rushed. So I asked the publisher again if I could divide it again. So basically I unwound my own series. And so Unsold is the 3rd book in the series. I'm working on the 4th one now, Undivided, taking the remaining 200 pages and really fleshing them out and making it really work. Very excited about it. Does anybody want to shout out a page number?
30.
Too bad, I'm reading what I want.
I knew you were going to say that.
In between Unwind and Unholy, I wrote a story that became a novella. Everything seems to come out longer than I intended to. That was only online, called Unstrung. And in Unstrung, a kid by the name of, we meet a kid by the name of Will. And he's Native American, and he plays amazing guitar. I mean, he can just melt your soul with his guitar playing. And the character of Lev, who is one of the main characters in Unwind, meets him. And in the course of the story, Will gets taken by parts pirates, by black marketeers who are taking kids and selling them on the black market for unwinding. Well, it turns out, and this is mentioned in Unholy, Cam has this amazing ability to play guitar. It turns out that he has Will's hands and that part of Will's brain that holds his creativity, and also some of his memories. In Unsold, he finds his way back to the reservation using what little memories he has. And he runs into Una, who was Will's fiancée, who never got over the loss of Will. She dreams of Will again. She dreams of him way too often. At times she wishes he would leave her alone because the waking is always so painful. This time, however, when she awakes, the music he played in her dream continues. It's faint, but it's still there. At first she thinks she must have left one of his recordings playing in the living room, or maybe Grace, who tends to dig out everything from every drawer, has found one and is playing it. But when she goes into the living room, she finds Grace asleep on the sofa. Connor and Lev are sleeping as well in the spare room, and the music, she realizes, is coming from downstairs. Una opens the door, and the volume rises. She hears it echoing in the stairwell, ghostly but very much real. It's not a recording, it's live. It's a song of Will's that only he can play, and her heart nearly bursts from her chest. He's alive, and he's come home, and he's greeting her with a serenade. She hurls herself down the stairs, her bathrobe billowing behind her. She knows what she's thinking can't be, but she wants so desperately for it to be true that it shuts down all logic within her. Una bursts into the shop to see a figure sitting on a stool playing a guitar she had just prepared for a customer to pick up in the morning. Although she can't see his face, she can see the way he holds himself that it is not Will. "Who are you?" she demands, barely able to restrain her anger. "It's not Will. What are you doing in my shop?" He stops playing, looks at her for just a moment, then gets up. She notices something off about his face before he turns away. He puts the guitar down on the counter. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was here." "So you think you can just break in?" It wasn't lie. Which is a lie. Ever since Lev and the others came to stay with her a few days ago, she's constantly checking that lie. Then, on the counter beside the guitar, she sees the spare key. No one knew about that key. Even she had forgotten about it. So how did this intruder find it? "I didn't mean to disturb you." "Wait." Una knows she should let him go. She knows that if she reaches to pull this strand of hope, any number of things could unravel. Everything could unravel, but she has to know. "That song you were playing, where did you hear it?" "I heard it played once by an Arapachi boy," he tells her, "and I remembered it." But she knows this too is a lie. Even those with the skill to play something after hearing it only once could never capture the nuances and the passion. That belonged to Will alone. And yet, come a little closer. He's hesitant, but does as she asks. Now, as he steps into the light, she realizes what the oddness about his face was. His entire face is covered in thick pancake makeup, like a vain old woman trying to hide her wrinkles. "I have a skin condition," he tells her. His eyes are engaging, persuasive. "I'm looking for some friends," he tells her. "They mentioned this guitar shop." "What are their names?" He pauses before he speaks. "I can't tell you their names or it would compromise their safety, but if you know them, then you know who I'm talking about." So, he's come for Lev and Connor. Or maybe he's there for Grace to take her back to whatever life she was plucked from. His eyes speak of honesty, but so much about this visitor seems wrong. He could be working for the juvenile authority, or worse, a parts pirate hoping to bring Connor and Lev in for a hefty reward. She decides not to telegraph her suspicion, though, not until she has a better idea of his intentions. "Well, if you can't tell me their names, tell me yours." "Mac," he says. "My name is Mac." And he holds out his hand for her to shake. It's the feel of his hand that gives him away, the firmness and texture of his grip. Sense memory knows that hand before she's even consciously aware of it. When she looks down at it, she almost gasps, but keeps it in. She turns the hand slightly in hers to notice a tiny scar on the third knuckle of the index finger from when Will cut himself as a boy. Now she has visual proof. She forces her breathing to stay calm and in control. She has yet to fully comprehend what this means, but she will. Una releases his hand and turns away for fear that something in her face might give her away. "I'll tell you about your friends, Mac, under one condition," she says. "Yes, anything." She grabs the guitar from the counter and holds it out to him. "That you play for me again." He smiles, takes the guitar, and sits down on the stool. "My pleasure." He begins, and the song grabs the thread of hope that Una so foolishly tugged at and sails away with it, rending Una down to her very essence. The song is haunting. It is beautiful. It is Will's music alive, but in someone else. She lets the strains of melody and harmony caress her. Then she comes up behind him, kabongs him over the head with a heavy guitar so forcefully that it breaks, and he falls unconscious on the floor. She listens to make sure there's no stirring from upstairs. She must not wake the others. Satisfied that no one is heard, she heaves Mac onto her shoulders like a sack of flour. Although she's a small woman, she's strong from working the lathe, plane, and sander. It tests the limit of her strength and endurance, but she manages to move through the night streets and finally into the woods. Una knows the woods well. Will was at home there, and so she came to feel that way as well. She carries him nearly half a mile through the forest with nothing to light her way but the moon until she reaches the old sweat lodge. Once inside, she tears off his jacket and shirt and uses them to string him up between two poles 6 feet apart. She knots the fabric so tightly only a knife could undo it. The rest of his unconscious body slumps on the ground, his arms outstretched above him in a supplicative why. This is how she leaves him for the night. When she returns at dawn, she brings a chainsaw. Cam knows this is not going to be a good day the moment he sees the chainsaw. His head hurts in so many places he can't begin to know where he was actually hit. It feels as if all the members of his internal community have taken up arms against one another and are slicing his brain to bits. The young woman sitting beside the chainsaw hefts a rock in one hand. "Good, you're awake," she says. "I was running out of stones." He notices that there are rocks all around him. She's been throwing it to him to wake him up. He gets up on his knees to relieve the strain on his shoulder, surprised that his seams haven't split. He takes in his surroundings before speaking. He's in a large, dome-shaped structure made of stones and mud, or at least made to look that way. Morning sunlight spills through the gaps in the stone. There's a washed-out pile of ashes in the middle, and on the other side of the ashes sits the girl and her chainsaw. Light pouring through the hole up above illuminates her face, just enough for him to recognize her as the girl from the guitar shop. His last memory was playing for her, and now he's here. I guess you didn't like my song. It wasn't your song at all, she responds. He can feel her anger from across the room like a blast of radiation. And by the look of you, that's not the only thing that isn't yours. She gets up, grabs the chainsaw, and steps over the pile of ashes toward him. He struggles to get to his feet. She touches the silent chainsaw to his bare chest. He can feel the cold steel of the dormant chain as it caresses his skin. She uses its curved tip to trace the seams. Up and down and around, those lines go everywhere, don't they? Like an old shaman's sand drawings. Cam says nothing as she moves the chainsaw along his torso, then across his neck. The shaman's lines are meant to trace life and creation. Is that what your lines are for too? Are you a creation? Are you alive? The question of questions. You'll have to decide that for yourself. Are you that man-made man I've heard tell of? Well, you can keep all those other parts, but those hands deserve a proper funeral. Then she starts the chainsaw and it roars to life, puffing forth acrid, hellish smoke and releasing an ear-splitting report that makes Cam's seams ache in alarm. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out when you came last night? His eyes are fixed on the deadly blade, but he tears his gaze away to focus on her, to get through to her. I was drawn here. He was drawn here. And if you take these hands, you'll never hear him play again. It was the wrong thing to say. Her face contorts into a mask of sheer hatred. I'd already gotten used to that. I'll get used to it again. And she swings the blade toward his right arm. Cam can do nothing but brace himself. He readies himself for the surge of pain, watching as the chainsaw comes down. But then, at the last instant, she twists her arm, aborting the attack, and the momentum veers sideways, cutting his knotted jacket and setting his right arm free from the pole. She hurls the chainsaw across the room, screaming in frustration, and Cam thrusts his free arm toward her. He means to grab her by the neck and hurl her to the ground, but instead, he finds his hand reaching behind her to the ribbon in her hair and pulling it free. Her long hair flares out from behind her as the ribbon falls to the ground, and she backs away, staring at him in horrified disbelief. Why did you do that, she demands. Why did you do that? And Cam suddenly understands. Because he likes your hair free. He always pulled out your hair ribbons, didn't he? He lets loose a sudden laugh as the emotion of the memory hits him all at once like a sonic boom. She stares at him. Her face is hard to read. He doesn't know whether she's going to run in terror or pick up the chainsaw again. Instead, she bends down to pick up her ribbon and rises, keeping her distance. What else do you know? She asks. I know what I feel when I play his music. He was in love with someone, deeply. That brings tears to her eyes, but Cam knows they're tears of anger. You're a monster. I know. You should never have been made. Not my fault. You say you know he loved me, but do you even know my name? Cam searches his memory for her name, but there are neither words nor images in his personal piece of Will Tashine's psyche. There is only music, gestures, and a disconnected history of touch. So instead of a name, he shares with her what he does know. There's a birthmark on your back he would tickle when you danced, Cam says. He liked toying with an earring in the shape of a whale. The feel of his guitar-calloused fingertips and the crook of your elbow made you tremble. Enough, she says, taking a step back, then more quietly. Enough. I'm sorry, I just wanted you to see that he's still here, in these hands. She's silent for a moment, looking at his face, looking at his hands. Then she comes closer, pulls out a pocket knife, and cuts the shirt that ties him to the other pole. Show me, she says. And so he reaches up, abandoning thought and putting all trust in his fingertips the way he did when searching for the key to her shop. He touches the nape of her neck, moves a finger across her lips, and remembers the feel of them. He cups her cheek in his palm, then he brings the fingertips of his other hand drizzling down her wrist, over her forearm, to that singular spot in the crook of her elbow. And she trembles. Then she raises the heavy stone she's been hiding in her other hand and smashes him in the side of the head, knocking him out cold again. When he regains consciousness, he's tied to the poles once more, and once again, he's alone.